You all know how passionate I am about The Economist. Well, this week, I talked with The Economist Deputy Executive Editor, a good friend of mine, Ken Cukier. Ken is one of these people who makes me smarter every time I talk to him. He's written multiple books on data and decision making, and in this discussion today, we focus on the power of the human brain and its advantage over AI. I'm excited to share that with you. The episode is less than 20 minutes, and you won't regret it, I promise. I also stuck some exclusive photos and content at the end of the CarCast, so you're going to want to stick until the end because it's guaranteed to make you smile. If you're in the field of data and you want to understand the art and science behind decision making, this CarCast is for you. And if you're not one of the 6 million people who catch this CarCast everywhere it's syndicated, don't forget to subscribe to the CarCast down here on YouTube because that is the best way to stay on top of these videos as they publish. Let's listen in. We do not see things as they are. We see things as we are. That is a quote from this book, Framers, a book dedicated to uncovering the human advantage in the world of AI. And my good friend, co-author of this book, Ken Cukier, is on the CarCast with me today. And he and I are going to break down the main learnings of this book and engage, hopefully, all of you with the conversation will provide you with the tools you need to understand the power of your brain, the human brain, its advantage, in the context where everything today seems to be about AI. Ken, welcome to the CarCast.
Bruno, happy to be here.
So Ken and I have known each other for close to 15 years. I was looking up photos of us when we first met, and fair warning, Ken, I don't want to embarrass you, but they might pop up here and there throughout the CarCast. I even prepared some very special ones for us if people stick until the end of the interview. We met when your report, The Data Deluge, made the front page of The Economist magazine, and everyone knows here, Ken, I'm a big fan of The Economist. I have, in fact, CarCast dedicated to the magazine, and a link is going to pop up here so people can find out more about what I mean. Ken is the deputy executive editor at The Economist. You will find him in the media quite a bit. He's got popular keynotes. I think his TED Talk hit over 2 million views. So definitely someone you're going to want to Google and follow. Ken, let's start at the top. When we met, I was at Microsoft. I was just about to embark actually on one of my 3 data startups I did. And you, in your report, you quoted Cloudera at the time. They had just launched. They went IPO 10 years later after that. So you really caught the importance of this field very early, and you made it available to mainstream very, very early. What was going on at this time for you? How did you even get yourself into this field of data, AI, and analytics?
So interesting. It's a great question. Like all journalists, you get lucky. But I'll take a bigger stab at it, which is there's a great line in Vonnegut that says, Kurt Vonnegut, the novelist, that all pilots are always looking for, good pilots are always looking for a place to land. And so too, all journalists are looking for a story. All bank robbers are looking for a bank to rob. And so I had always been sort of ruminating on this issue of information. In fact, I had a sort of like epiphany about a decade earlier, around the year, was it 2004, where I just struck by the idea that all the world is made of information, and behind everything that you can see, the world of appearances, was something informational, and you could render the whole world as information. And if you did that, you can understand it better, and you can optimize it, and then you could do new things. And I, like a lot of journalists, and just like who I am, I took that insight and I just socked it away and didn't think about it. And about almost a decade later, it was around 2010, The Economist was looking, 2009, The Economist was looking for front page, for cover stories through our correspondence, and I proposed it. I had basically weeks. This was just around the time of the financial crisis, but I was still lucky that we had that budget. And I could just go off. They accepted it. And I sort of wrote something that was more fictitious than factual, because I was based in Tokyo at the time as the Japan correspondent, about how information was going to become the substrata of society and all that is, and that on the internet, what you were collecting was not just all the interactions that people were doing, like a search query and getting it back, or buying something and purchasing it, but it was rendering a digital trail, data exhaust, that was going to be used for other things. Honestly, I had no idea what that meant. Of course, I had heard the term machine learning, didn't really understand it. I went forward with it, and after about 6 weeks, came back with this idea that there was a community and there was a term for it, and it was called big data. I got very lucky. We published it. It was one of the first times the term big data appeared in the popular press in that in that way. It was a shorthand for machine learning. And then I wrote a book on it with a friend of mine, and it became the sort of Freakonomics for machine learning, and it was called Big Data. And in some ways, it inaugurated the big data revolution, and in some ways as well, the modern AI revolution, because modern AI, after 2012, is based on data as opposed to the earlier AI from 1950 onwards or so, which was based on logic and symbolic AI, good old-fashioned AI. Now it's going to be statistical machine learning and deep learning, and that was the kink. And so that was the path I've been on since then.
No, I remember reading, the report, and it was great for someone like me that'd been in the field for a while and felt like nobody really cared. Finally had seen, okay, no, the mainstream market is going to see this benefit that data is not about the back office. It really is about the front office. It is about recommendation engines. It is about making our life so much better, creating compelling customer experiences, etc. And now you're at it again, talking about AI. You gave a talk in London about AI and human spirituality, not just humanity, but spirituality. So we're going to get into that in a little bit here. But before we do that, just so everybody can orient themselves, what was the insight that drove you to write the book? And if I could just use this, these frames, so important for humans.
Absolutely. So we wrote the book, and we made the point that you needed to listen to the data, that latent within information was some quotient of within the data was some quotient of information that could be extracted if you have the ability and the tools to do so. And we got criticized for the book a little bit by people who were saying, well, you can't just trust the data. You can't just take, the data is never raw data, and you can't just trust data because the data always sits into a model. And people were often thinking of a statistical model, and beyond a statistical model, there'd be a mental model. We always presumed that. It was so much so that we didn't need to overtly explain that. But we thought about it because these were the smartest people in the world who were giving us the smartest criticism. And we thought, yeah, there's something to that. Maybe we should just focus on that one dimension. So we brought in a third co-author who's a specialist in decision science. And together, we wrote the book Framers, which was to actually make the point that in a world of data that's everywhere, before you actually tap it, you need to understand how you're seeing the world, how you're representing the problem. Because if you take the phantasmagoria of the world that is so large, that if you look at it at this point, you get one answer. And if you look at here, you get that. There's a trap that we're in, the Daniel Kahneman behavioral economics trap, which he says, all these cognitive biases, humans are bad decision makers. And we said, no, wait a minute, the story's more complicated. Kahneman helps us choose between A or B, but humans are brilliant because if we widen our frame or we reframe situations, it's not a choice between A and B and getting better at choosing between A and B, but enlarging the range of alternatives that we can imagine and choosing between A, B, C, or D, or E. And then if we have better alternatives, we can make better choices. And if we have better choices, we get better outcomes. So we need to become better framers in the world in terms of how we see the world to become better at solving our toughest problems. Because the reason we're not solving our problems, our societal challenges or business challenges, is because we're bad at seeing the problem in its entirety.
So now we're getting into the heart of decision making. There's a lot of work being done there. And what you're highlighting, and it's particularly important right now, is this human advantage in the AI world. So let's dive into that. Let's expand on that. What are the types of frames that we need to consider when making decisions as human beings?
So the first way of thinking about it is that we're framing all the time, right? That's a basic feature of cognition. If we didn't actually have a frame or a schema or a template of how the world works, a mental model of how the world works, every single experience would be a brand new one, and we would be flooded with a jumble of noises that we wouldn't understand until we picked out that it was a car backfiring or that it was someone speaking to us, of colors and different that we would see until we said, well, we're in a park and it's sunlight. We don't have to do that because we already know what these things are. We expect, there's a range, a myriad of things that we expect. That's good. It allows us just get on with life, right? We hear a car backfiring and we don't duck, right? We don't think we're under fire. So That's helpful. The problem, though, is that because we're so in line with presuming the world to be one way, that we miss things when they change because we see it with our set of eyes and we say, oh, this just X, right? It's like imagine people at Nokia were saying, 2007, oh, what the world wants is a phone. We're a phone company. We make phones. What people want are inexpensive phones. And what they really want is more as inexpensive we can make it. The cheaper, the better. Right. And how do we go to market? We sell it to the carriers, the mobile phone operators, and they pass it on through the monthly subscription to the person. And again, customers want it inexpensive. Steve Jobs is, not as a mobile phone company, it was as a computer company. And computers are one where the consumer buys it outright. It's relatively expensive and it's extensible based on the features that they choose that they want. Now, his original app store was one that he controlled more then it wasn't as open as it was, but he adopted the App Store model that is there today. The key thing is by reframing the device, not as a phone, but as a small computer in your pocket, he could actually absorb more of the market because that's where people wanted to. A constraint, memory, screen, right? All these different features that were natural constraints when Nokia came up with its mental model of the telephone as a mobile phone, as well as their culture and their background, meant that they saw the world one way, but the world had changed. They didn't notice it. And Steve Jobs, he was a genius in part because he had recognized where the world was going. The world hadn't changed to where he wanted it to go yet. He was actually at the forefront. He actually, in some ways, pushed forward the change. He created that world. And that the great aphorism by Alan Kay is that it's, instead of predicting they should invent it, was one that was, very, Alan Kay worked at Apple.
So now we're getting into the heart of discussion where I've always wanted to talk to you about this World Cup in 2018 where France won. Here I am showing my own bias, of course, but in the book, your causality, counterfactuals, and constraints. You talked a little bit about constraints here. Tell us about this counterfactual reasoning advantage that we have as humans over technology.
I work in the World Cup, the great French win in 2018 for your benefit. When you think about these mental models, what does it entail? What is a mental model? Well, there's three features to it. As you said, causality, counterfactuals, and constraints. Causality is basically an implicit sense of cause and effect of how the world works. Sometimes we're wrong, right? In fact, we're quite often wrong of causality. We don't actually know to the iota, to the nth degree, what is causal or not, but we have an implicit sense. And by having an implicit sense, we naturally presume that the world is a repeatable process and that things are understandable. They don't happen for random reasons. Sometimes they might, but we can actually understand the world through the lens of cause and effect. For constraints, it's that we have are very narrowed, right? So what are counterfactuals? Because if not, there'd be just an abundant combinatorial explosion of possibility. The counterfactuals are basically the idea of playing the game of life 2 ticks ahead by imagining what is going to happen. We have counterfactual reasoning when we're jaywalking, right? We understand the causal process. We get hit by a car, we're creamed and dead, right? We don't care about whether, about wearing a blue hat or a white hat. We don't care if the car is, has a license plate number, one number or another. What we do care about is the relevant constraint, or counterfactual rather, whether we can get across the street or not. So we're constantly doing this all the time by imagining the world and imagining what might happen if we do this versus that. And we choose based on that. Now, in the World Cup, an interesting thing happened in which a striker from France kicked the ball, a defender missed it with his hand, with his head in a sense, but it skimmed his head ever so gently. By doing so, the ball that would have been an easy catch, an easy save by the goalie, went just above the goalie's hands and into the net to score. So now the referee has played the game of life 2 ticks ahead and figure out what would have happened if not for that hit. So he can't go, it's a goal, it got into the net, but he can't give it to the striker because the striker actually didn't score the goal. It was attributed to, sadly, the defender from Croatia who's skimmed. And so the idea is that the referee had to counterfactual reasoning to figure out, well, what would have happened were it not for that? And he realized here it would have been saved, but in this way it was a goal, and he attributed it to the defender.
So, and you have a whole section on that, this idea of imagining alternate realities. You have a great way you see in the book. It's envisioning worlds that do not exist. Let us in this one, right? It's this idea, just like the jaywalking, just like the soccer eggs, what could have been and what could be is a advantage for humans. Now, there is a model to think about how you your own, and it's the 3R model, right? It's repertoire, repurposing, and reinvention. You talked a little bit about invention earlier in the iPhone example, I think. But take us through that. How should listeners here think about how they can structure their advantage to make better decisions?
Great. Yeah. So the first thing is this idea of thinking outside the box is bullshit. So you don't want to just simply don't even try to think outside the box. In fact, in lots of academic research, when they've asked people to think outside the box, their ideas are worse, the quality of ideas go down, the frustration goes up. So it actually is very difficult to think outside the box. And the reason why is we're always in a box, and you need to be very conscious of what box you're in. And if you need to change the box, that's fine. But you can't just be outside of a box. You're always in a box. In fact, that box is very beneficial to you, right? Steve Jobs didn't want to, he created a phone, he called it the iPhone, but he wasn't creating a holographic, teleprompter. He was just creating, a transponder. He was creating something that he actually knew what it was. And he was very deliberate. He applied it to his own business of computing. It was just a souped up computer. So if you're staying in that, you want to stay in try to frame as much as you possibly can. The idea of reframing things, of literally changing the frame to something totally different, that's quite radical. I'll explain what I mean by that. Take capitalism and inequality and the fact that companies are sometimes doing things that seem adverse to societal interests. An alternative is to actually change the frame. Don't be capitalist, be communist. Wham! Like that is a reframe of how to manage the economy. But it is massively huge. I mean, getting rid of property, getting rid of incentives and individual incentives, having the state own all of the means of production. That's massive, right? Changes literally everything. In fact, Marx's view is like good. He actually wants to get rid of religion, right? Like everything changes at the opium of the people. So instead, look at where capitalism has gone. Shareholder activists. They used to hand inside of the general meetings, shareholder meetings, with placards and shouting judgments as they walked in. Then they had the idea of, why don't we buy a share and go into the meeting? Now the the activists against the shareholders go into the meeting because they own a share of the company, stand up at the microphone, and then they harangue inside the meeting rather than outside the meeting. So too the idea of a B Corp, right? Before there was the idea of like, if I'm going to world, why don't we have having a charity that will do good in this world? And now the new thinking was, well, why should we create a charity that has these huge, difficult, massively complicated reporting requirements and regulatory requirements just to do good things, and you're beholden to the Attorney General of the state in which you're incorporated in the US? Makes no sense. Why don't we create a company that sets out in its bylaws the fact that we are going to do good things? And you can and that's the nature of the company. It's called a B Corp, right? Yeah. So if you will, in both instances, they stayed within the frame of capitalism and a commercial economy and the company and the corporate structure, but they're doing good things with it. So this is a way of, in the ordinary parlance, we refer to that as reframing. It's just a simple reframing. But in the book, we were a little bit more nuanced by saying, when you reframe, it's really this monumental leap, but instead you're really just adjusting different parts of the frame for a given outcome. And that's going to be a lot more effective for people. But the key thing is to know that, one, we're always in a frame, and two, we can adjust features of it for the outcome that we want, because sometimes the constraints that we see aren't hard constraints, but they're soft constraints, or they change over time. In case of Steve Jobs, many of the constraints made it impractical to create an iPhone in 2004, made it extremely eminent to create an obvious to create an iPhone in 2007.
So you've got three methodologies here that we need to consider as humans. The first one is this idea of repertoire. You're drawing from familiar frames. We've got repurposing, which you talked about here, adopting frames from maybe a different industry. You take the example, I think, of the founder of IKEA in your book. And finally, reinvention. It's the most challenging method, I think, for reframing, so you can successful models and read them. How do I know when to use what? How do I know when to use my repertoire, when I need to repurpose, or when I need to reinvent? Does this come naturally to humans, or I just have to be conscious about it?
It's a great question. I think, well, all of life is an experimentation. If you're not always experimenting, you're not actually advancing. You're not being the tribe that is bring civilization to another phase of progress, right? What you're doing is you're just sort of like Dilbert playing, or that guy from the Lego movie, just playing it straight, playing it alone. That's a boring place to be. And trust me, anyone who's watching this right now is not that person, right? You're at CarCast, you probably care about technology, care about data. You're probably very ambitious and you want to change the world. And before you change the world with a touch of man, you change the world through the insight and idea that you have. That is a new idea. So how would you go about doing it? The concept of repertoire is that we have lots of different frames. We've learned lots of things. And you can say, and sometimes it's deliberate, sometimes it's not. You could say, oh, like for Steve Jobs, it could have been, let's make this a small computer, right? That's a very simple one. But it could be, hey, what's this movie? And they did it this way in that movie. I bet I could apply it in a similar way, in this way. We're constantly cross-applying things from one domain to another. In fact, Matt Ridley, the famous author, as well as a member of the House of Lords in Britain, has written a book, former science editor of The Economist. He has this idea of innovation being when ideas have sex. And the idea is that you have one idea, it cross-pollinates something else, they push up together, and you create something new out of it. And there's a lot of innovations where they just simply, in material science, something from biology, right? In physics, I mean, what is it? Niels Bohr's model of the atom looks like the Copernican, model of the universe, right?
Yeah.
What we know about and the nucleus is that it doesn't look like that, but he needed somehow, and it stuck. So the atom looks like the universe. The comparison between the two actually is only imaginary, and it's only in that image, right? It's not really like that because electrons going around all the time, always are buzzing around. Quasi-planetary motion is anything but random, right? We can know exactly where it is 1,000 years from now to the second. To say we're cross-applying it. So if we try one and we can't apply it, then we need to adjust it. And if we're going to use a repertoire, try to repurpose something, cross-apply it. And if not, we have to reinvent it. That's the classic reframing of doing it entirely anew, of reversing something completely. The idea of thesis miasma was one where we said, no, it's not in air, or just like some sort of black magic. Disease is spread through literally particles that we can then put under a microscope and we can identify. And we're going to give it the name bacteria.
I love this framework because it really allows you to break down the best way to make a decision about facts. Now, I know that we could talk for hours, and I definitely want to continue having this conversation. I can't let you go before talking about your new project. I don't know if you're comfortable talking about what you're working on, but I'm just very curious. You tend to pick 10 years before they occur. So tell us a little bit more about what you're working on.
Absolutely. So big data was about AI and data, and it was sort of early. And then we have framers, which is about our mental model. The quote that you began with, that we do not see things as they are, but as we are, is attributed to a line in the Talmud, which is a very commentary on the Hebrew text. It turns out that it's actually not from the Talmud at all, but is attributed to the Talmud. And you have to read the book and the footnotes to actually see how that weirdness happened. But it's a classic phrase that seems to land very well with people in a deep themselves. So in a world of AI, when you think about even people who believe that there's AGI possible, the G is general intelligence, and that there's others who say, well, you can have conscious machines. It's just a matter of complexity and emergence that comes from the complexity. A human being, biology, and we are conscious. And so therefore a machine made up of transistors that will become conscious. I actually disagree with that. I believe that humans are special. And when I sort of plowed in that domain, thinking deeply about consciousness, about AI, how it works, and about how humans work based on framers, machines work with data, humans don't need it. We can imagine alternative universes that we don't have any experience with because we have this capacity for transcendence in the world of ideas. We also have that capacity for transcendence in a deeper, more spiritual way. Humans are very spiritual creators. Now, that's not to say it's religious or that there's a theistic view of God, but it is to say that we have this sense of deeper meaning and higher purpose. And machines don't have that. In fact, if anything, machines work because of data, but for us, we get insight, sometimes some of our most profoundest insights, in moments where we push the rest of the world away, and it's in the stillness and the quiet that we learn something that we otherwise wouldn't know. That in theology is called the apophatic theology, or negative theology, not using it to learn something, but actually in silence and in the emptiness and the hollowness of being, receiving some sort of idea that you otherwise wouldn't have. The Greek term kenosis means emptiness, and that's the origin of wisdom. Likewise, the Greeks had two terms for arriving at truth. One was logos, the logical and the analytical mind, the rational mind. And the other was mythos, not myth like that which is untrue, but mythos in terms of that which is timeless, that which is always true. And between the two, they felt that mythos was a better way of arriving at truth and thinking than at logos, because logos, any lawyer in a courtroom could use logos, not certain you got to the truth, but mythos was deeper and more profound than that. If you look at AI and how it works, it's all logos, it's no mythos. And humans are capable of both. And because of that, that's why I believe that humans are smarter than machines and will always be able to bring something to our thinking and our understanding of the universe that the machines never will. The machines will always be our servants and never should be our masters. We should be in control because we have this precious gift of life. The machines are inanimate while we are animate, at least while we take our breaths. And that's the nature of the next book.
Well, I can't wait to hear about that. I mean, if I try to translate this, it's this idea of principles versus logic. And if I can add a third dimension around emotion, often we feel that we're emotional machines that explain the logic behind our decisions. So it's a very complex field, and that's why I'm so passionate to be working in it. Ken, thank you so much for giving us time to talk to us about all this. I hope people will follow you. I can't wait to see the next book. I can't wait to see you again in person in London. Thanks again for your time. I hope that it was a very special and useful CarCast to all of you listening to us. Let us know, put it likes, comments, share it, and subscribe to the CarCast YouTube channel if you want to find out more. I will see you next week. And Ken, thank you again so much. I'll see you very, very soon.
Fantastic. Thank you, Bruno. Thanks, everyone.